including me on this panel. It's very exciting to be here. I am doing okay. I am calling in from Needham, Massachusetts, which is where I live. I work in downtown Boston, and Fatima and the She Geeks Out group are members of our office, our workspace. But we're kind of doing a rotational, coming into work on a rotational basis. I'm doing okay. I have 3 kids at home with me right now. So I swore, I made a pact with my 15-year-old who's behind me online right now that he can't talk while I'm doing this. So let's hope he abides by that. I'm doing okay. I think as the team at Impact Hub Boston, we have been in, as like everyone, a period of kind of rethinking and reevaluating what we do. How do we do it? Almost like a metamorphosis in a way. So there's a lot going on, a lot of different factors, as I imagine with everybody. How do we do the work we do? What is the work that we do? That sort of thing. So a lot, I think my head is kind of spinning on a daily basis, as I imagine a lot of people would feel the same way. So that's how I'm doing today. Today, Monday, June 29th at 12:39 p.m.
I hear that day by day, moment by moment. Thanks so much for joining us. And we want to normalize that it is okay that you have kids and whoever else you're taking care of. So thank you. Heber.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. I'm just really excited to be here. And I think this is an important discussion to have. And I'm a teacher, so I'm in between teaching summer courses and coming down from a chaotic end of the school year. So that's a lot of time to reflect right now. And I think that this is a beautiful space to do that with amazing people that I know are interested in making sure that post-COVID workplaces are ready for us, and that we're ready because we're the ones creating it. There's just a lot of moving parts going on right now for me, projects and teaching and all this, but I'm very excited to be here, and I'm ready to engage with you all.
For sharing, and I'm excited that you're here. Jenna.
Hi. Well, I'm also so grateful and excited to be here. I think Heber and I were talking earlier. It's sort of like every day, every week, sometimes every hour, feeling a little different. There's a lot going on. I think over the past few months, I've been burnt out, but I've also been energized. I've been really disappointed with a lot. And I've also been really proud. So it's a lot at once, but I'm super jazzed. I was sharing with Fatima earlier. I'm so honored to be here. I think with a lot of the recent events in this country, exposing the systemic racism, on a personal level, I've been just really deeply saddened and doing a lot of research for myself to educate myself and how I can use my various positions, as a leader, as a firm owner, as an employer, as a designer, and just like generally as a white person to help clear the way. And so being a part of this conversation, I'm just really energized about it. And yeah, I'm a designer, so I'm guilty of being an eternal optimist. So at the end of the day, I definitely believe that we can design a better future for all of us, and not just some of us. So I'm overall energized, I guess.
So much, and thanks for that perspective. I know that you'll be talking more about just how you feel as a person with all the different positionalities, and all of us will be speaking to that. So thanks so much, Jenna. And Yani.
Hey y'all, really great to be with you all. Jenna, I appreciate you bringing in optimism because like the first thing that came to mind was like, I'm cautiously optimistic today. Similarly, I feel like every 20 minutes I have a new feeling about what this is like. And I think especially as somebody who is both connected to and through my work adjacent and supporting social movements, there's a lot of stuff that's happening that a lot of my like friends and elders could only dream about. So there's both so much things to be excited about and conversations and actions that are happening that, again, we had no idea would be happening in 2020. And like, it's a tricky balance to hold that optimism alongside like both a global pandemic, as well as the many lives that have been lost that have agitated the current uprisings that are happening across the country and around the world. And in the midst of that, I'm following the leadership of those whom I love, and we're holding on to the joy. So really glad to be here.
You all so much. Just your intro. Hopefully people just know what our panelists are coming in with, just reflecting on a personal level, but recognizing that the personal is not separate from the professional. So I appreciate you all already kicking it off with being honest and vulnerable, truly. And so with that, you all have mentioned what's happening in our current climate as it relates to COVID, how it's still impacting us. We know that however we define reopening, it's still scary for a lot of folks. I'm here in DC, and every time I open the news or check my notifications, I see that the numbers have spiked, right? And so what has the current climate, specifically as it relates to COVID, taught you about what's working and what's not working in your individual workplaces? So I'm happy to kick it off with Yani, and then we can just go the opposite direction.
So at Resist, we're a worker self-directed nonprofit, which is an interesting merger between a more traditional nonprofit structure and a cooperative structure. And so like what we are seeing that works is that as a staff, we're the primary decision makers around policy, around culture, around long-term vision of how our organization functions. And so that's included the need to be flexible and adaptive as the various crises, and in particular COVID, has reached us personally and through our grantees. And in terms of what's not working, I think like many more traditional nonprofits, our ability to respond is at the whim of our donors. So when the pandemic first hit, we were really proud that we were able to be responsive with our grantees, and in particular offer a lot of financial support. And now we're in a tricky position where the finances are not clear around what we're up to, both in the short term and the long term. So how do we maintain responsiveness today, while also thinking about the long-term work that's to come, especially as we're talking about both the round 2 of the first wave of COVID and the many talks around the second wave of the virus. So if anything, one of the things that isn't working is why we don't think philanthropy as it's currently structured as a field works. And it pushes us to evaluate what we're doing strategically, both with our grantees and pushing in the industry of philanthropy around how do we support movements and direct service organizations who have to be responding in this moment of urgency.
So much for that, Yani, and deeper about what that means now and what it means for Resist to be supporting these organizations that you're working with, and also what does it mean for future reference. So thanks for sharing that. Jenna.
Yeah, so Fennie and Mehl, so we are an interior design and architecture studio, and we've been in business for over 20 years, and about 60, so it's over 60% of our portfolio is workplace design. So both as a as a workplace, we are a workplace, but then also as a studio that designs workplaces. You can imagine we've been in some pretty deep conversations about this, because shelter in place has been like this ultimate workplace design social experiment. And in a funny way, back to the optimism, is it's really kind of an opportunity of a lifetime for businesses and designers to rethink these like old traditional and maybe we didn't realize broken ways of doing things. 2 of my partners and I just hosted an event last Thursday for San Francisco Design Week, which was held virtually this year. But we literally broke down the reasons why to have a physical office to begin with. And so we're workplace designers, so you might think we have a bit of a bias about like why to have a physical office, but truthfully, what we're recommending is that businesses really make these decisions with the employee experience at the core, because it's people that have been keeping our businesses alive and running while all of our office buildings have been sitting empty for months. And, while we still need to see what the long-term consequences are, many surveys have been showing that remote working generally works. There's a workplace experience research company that we partner with. They're called Leaseman. They're an international group. And according to a survey to over 10,000 participants that they conducted starting in March, and then through May, they hit their 10,000 milestone mark. They've determined that working from home is thought of on average as an excellent workplace experience. Now, averages mask a lot of details and a lot of important ones. It's not excellent for everyone. In fact, some people are having a really terrible time, but it's still something to think about because it is working for a lot of people too. So it's sort of like the concept of remote work isn't anything new, but it feels like the pandemic has shifted the way we talk about it. And we think that it could go from a luxury perk that was reserved for a few to a more like kind of demystified, approachable way of doing things that, the question is now how to fit that into the office workflow, and how that will impact real estate in our world, how much space people need. But I don't know, I think like with COVID, it's just a reminder that designers and business owners have to start with people first, and on a basic level, like leading with empathy and like listening to what people really need first is huge.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that, Jenna. I'm just thinking about how many people have told me how it's so much easier for them to work remotely, and grateful that they have the opportunity, but then also thinking about access, right? Where some people are like, okay, this is cool, but I don't have the best setup, physical space to do this, or now I have to take care of my kids, or I'm a caregiver. So what does that look like? So I know we're going to talk more about that, but it's helpful to hear that perspective, to hear like, okay, what's working, and then what's Fennie and Mehl currently thinking about to address some of those issues. And so Heber, it seems like it'll be a perfect time for you to come in as we think about what access means. I know we were talking about it earlier offline, but yeah, what's going on in your world as an educator? What's working, what's not working?
Yeah, thank you. So I work for DC Public Schools. My school is called Columbia Heights Education Campus, and we serve 6th through 12th grade students. And we're a dual language campus. So we serve 99% free or reduced lunch, which is a key identifier of the socioeconomics. 99% of our students are free or reduced lunch. And that in itself, and also our campus is it's in the epicenter. We serve the epicenter of COVID-19 in DC. And so there's been just a lot in terms of COVID that's affected our community. But one of the things that is important to remember is that we are an educational institution, but schools, especially that serve Black and brown kids, we're not just an educational institution, we're a community pillar. And we service our students in so many different regards, and that's with our private partners as well. And this has sort of been, and like Jenna said, at first this was, this was something that we couldn't conceptualize, but as Jenna says, this is also an opportunity to rethink, redesign. And that's exactly what we have been trying to do. And it's been very difficult because education at the primary and secondary level is very intimate. Whether it's in the classroom or all the activities that we do, all the services that we provide for our students is a very intimate experience. So in a sense, when we left on March 13th, that was the last day, and we didn't know that we weren't going to come back. All the classrooms were left just exactly the way they were. When we left, we didn't realize that we had to completely redesign and come up with a brand new school. It's a virtual school. And we were lucky that we were one of the schools through a lot of grants that we've received, that we have laptops, but we don't have one-to-one. and other schools in the district were worse off. So we had a blended learning approach before this, but even those systems we saw weren't enough. So we were not prepared. But again, this is an opportunity for us, and we have been meeting consistently. We have a reopen focus group that we've been doing. So that's been working in terms of working with my colleagues and really thinking creatively. But there are 200 employees at the school. So there's also that, there's a lot of hands, a lot of ideas. And so at the beginning, it was just like a cacophony of things that we could do, which was beautiful because everyone was stepping up to the plate. And that's just who we are as educators. But at the same time, we need to also sift through, what is actually going to work. So so I think the question was what's been working, what hasn't really been working. So the big things are, what's working is that we're really stepping up to the plate. What's not working is, I don't think that, well, for one, access, like you were saying, Fatima, lack of access to technology. The first few weeks was us, we became social workers trying to identify who are the kids that don't have internet, who are the kids that don't have laptops, who are the kids that are affected by COVID that need other services. And so that lack of access has been a huge, huge problem for us. Actually, DC, DC is where is working their budget right now. Actually, the council's meeting. So we have, as on the side, our work as, community leaders as well has been to push the council to make sure that they're including that funding for tech. And so it's been a struggle, and we're fighting to make sure that those things are funded. But yeah, the whole creating a community thing has also been something that is, or maintaining the community rather, the feel of a community, that intimate space has also been really difficult.
Much ever. I think you're hitting on a lot of things, especially as it relates to things that already existed. So I know when COVID first hit, a lot of people were using phrases like this is the great equalizer, and we quickly said it's not, because a lot of these inequities have already existed, and if anything, it's just showing what already has existed. So it sounds like some of the issues that you mentioned already existed, and some of them are exacerbated because of those inequities as it relates to socioeconomic status, and anti-Black racism, and so much more, which we'll get into the next question. But thanks so much for sharing that. And Alisha.
Fatima. So as Fatima mentioned in the beginning, Impact Hub Boston is a workspace or a co-working community. So what's interesting about our business is, yes, we have the team of staff, but then we support and have as members about 100 or so different other companies who work out of our space. So a challenge has been, we are a physical workspace in downtown Boston. And obviously with COVID and we shut down for a period of time, or not entirely shut down. We were open for essential work only, but staff was all work from home. And it was a really challenging time, as it was for everyone, because we had to really rethink, what do we do? We have to create a virtual hub. And the way that Heber said about, a virtual school, we felt from our perspective as the work we do, we have to create a virtual community and a virtual hub. And we never really gave it the time and attention. We had different community building platforms that our members could participate in, but we never gave it the time and attention it needed or deserved, because we were focused on the physical space connections. And that came naturally, that was easy, the people were there. And so I feel like you kind of get a little lazy and inertia of like, okay, this is what we do. Yeah, we have these side things, but really the main, benefit and the way we all connect is in the space. And now we're forced to, we remove that entirely. And now what do we do? So we had to put some more time and attention into these virtual platforms. So in terms of what's working is, it's forcing us to figure out, honestly, we're still on a journey in terms of what's working in the virtual space. It's forcing us to really put a lot of time and energy and thinking around what will work to communicate with members, to figure out, okay, if they're not engaging, why is that? What do they need? Is this even a way that they want to engage with us? So it's has forced us to really confront really important questions about, you know, who we are and who are our members, who should be our members, you know, who aren't currently here, who might now in a virtual sense feel like it's more accessible to be a member. Because you don't have the you know, transportation issue, you know, there's any number of ways it was not necessarily accessible before that maybe it could be now, but how does that look? And so we're still on the path to figuring that out in the virtual sense, doing online events and that sort of thing. So I was just saying the challenge for us is obviously our physical space. And what do we do with that? You know, how do we, you know, even the folks that are coming in are, you know, we've kind of reimagined our space for social distancing and put a lot of effort into safety measures. And so part of our thinking is, you know, we want to be a space that if you want to come back into work, you feel completely safe doing so. And so we've done a lot of work with our sister company, CIC, who we share all the space with in the building, to make it as safe as possible. And that was really a huge effort put forth, mostly on the CIC side, because they run all the kind of the operations throughout the building. So as the people come in, you know, how do we continue to create community when you're physically distant from each other? So that is a challenge that as folks start to come in more and more, that we're going to have to figure out, what does that look like? How do we respond to that? How do we make people feel like the benefit of coming in is this hubbish culture? You know, how do you create culture? Because in online space, that's hard to do, is to create a culture and a community. You know, the values and all of that is easier, I think, in a physical space than it is in an online one. And so we have a lot of challenges. I feel like I've listed mostly challenges as opposed to what's definitely working, because what's the space we're in right now?
Yeah. And I appreciate your honesty. A lot of us are still figuring it out. And as you all mentioned, moods and feelings, taking it each day by day, we're also figuring out what's actually working. And it'll actually take time for us to measure and get feedback to say, here's what we did. Did it actually work? So I appreciate you sharing that. So we're going to keep on rolling with the questions. I know that we're talking about COVID and its impacts and as it relates to the workplace, but obviously, you know, we talked about this a bit earlier. We've seen front and center how our colleagues and employees, especially our Black and Brown colleagues, are experiencing grief, pain, and hardship due to interpersonal and institutional issues. While some of them seem very recent, they're not necessarily new. So things around racism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, as it relates to recent deaths and killings. And that is also creating a change for a lot of companies. You know, some companies were already doing the work, but some companies are now saying, we have something that we need to do. And so with all of that, on both an individual and institutional level, how are each of you responding to that right now? So Jenna, if you want to kick us off, and then Heber, Alisha, and Yani.
Yeah, well, I mean, on a personal level, like doing whatever I can to educate myself more. You know, life's a journey. We always have a lot of learning to do, no matter who we are, where we are. I'm also a parent. I have a 16-month-old son here at home. And so I can't wait to raise him to be an anti-racist, feminist white male, because we need some more of those for sure. But I don't know, like along the lines of the current movement, going into like a personal level, I feel awoken this time to a concept that I'm surprised hadn't sunken in as much beforehand. And in some ways, a little embarrassed that I didn't recognize that, you know, the power I have and how I can use that power to proactively support Blacks, minorities, and so many others who face systems of injustice that I don't experience, you know, because of my position. So, like as a woman leader, I've gone to lots of events around women in business. And I remember as a really young entry-level designer attending these women in business events thinking, you know, why aren't men a part of these events and a part of these conversations? And I realize now that men can't always be there. You know, women need the support and power of other women who have those shared experiences. But I think the thing that my younger self was onto is that when it comes to the challenges that that women face, it seems that real change is addressed in kind of two parts. Like one part is us banding together and speaking up for ourselves, and the other is to get men and those who are already in seats of power to champion and speak out for us. And that's when real systemic change happens and seems to happen faster. So back to the current movement, I'm just really ready to, again, like educate myself and find ways to pay that forward for minorities, and to use my position as a white business owner, as a white designer, to do what I can to clear the way and reach out, and certainly have my eyes open to injustice and call it out outright when I see it. So, and then on an institutional level, so I'm calling from San Francisco. The Bay Area's rising costs and tech market over the past few decades have pushed out so much diversity from our area. And, it starts at the top. According to this Fastco article I was reading back in May, VC firms have 2% Black males represented and 0% Black females represented. So, I think as a region, we have a lot of work to do to secure minority representation at the top, and to stop pushing out the beautiful diversity that attracted so much of us to be here in the first place. But as a design firm that designs workplaces in the Bay Area, we want to take advantage of the current momentum and actively support diversity and inclusion at all levels. So there's a couple actions we've been talking about. So one is that our design process begins by us facilitating a visioning session with our client C-suite and their key stakeholders that are like driving their business. It's one of the energizing aspects of what we do as designers, because we talk to the people at the top of a company about what their vision is, and figure out how to create design solutions around that. But so we're seeing this as our firm's opportunity to ask questions about what the company is doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. Anything from hiring to business and cultural initiatives, so that we can dig into opportunities for the design of the physical space to address that. And then we're also asking these questions of our own leadership team at the studio. We're currently developing a DEI proposal so we can address diversity initiatives in our own hiring that are more overt than what we are currently doing. Leadership, professional development, business development, and some sort of process to continually manage that over time. And we've promoted diversity and inclusion in the past, but we want to convert the outrage that we have into more overt actions. One thing that we're currently doing, actually, that I'm really proud of, is that we're actively involved in mentoring underprivileged youth at our studio through an ICA program. We've been doing it for years, and it's been awesome. But we believe we can do a lot more too as a studio.
For sharing that, Jenna. And I hope that was helpful for people who are tuning in, because I think, we're going to hear from everyone else depending on where we are in our stages as it relates to DEI or social justice, depending on the lens or terms that you use to describe the work we use or do. Thinking about what does it look like to respond to what's happening. It's not just simply writing out a statement, or as you mentioned, just doing the external things, but looking at things internally. So who are you partnering with? Making sure that there's representation of Black and brown folks, women within the VC space, community, language, etc. So I think that's helpful for us to consider and think about. And thanks for the personal note as well on what this work means for you. Heber, what about you? What's going on your side?
So I'm a social studies teacher. So that means that I teach history, I teach economics, I teach all these things. And we're talking about systematic racism. And one of the things that I have found challenging for myself is talking about these things, providing a space for us to learn about it while maintaining my students' dignity, which has been tough. The Black students that we serve, the brown students that we serve, they understand racial inequities. They live it. I was a student where I teach right now, and so these are things that a lot of my students also feel a lot of stereotype threat, and a lot of that threat is a threat to their lives too. especially for our Black boys. And so one of the things that I think is very important for us as educators, and I often talk about our private partners, because it's important for our private partners to be involved now that public education isn't funded the way it's supposed to be funded, is that we need to make sure that we are empowering our Black and brown kids economically. And there's another part about the students that we serve is a huge percent of them are undocumented, come from undocumented families and are undocumented themselves, which means that they never received a stimulus check, which means that they're afraid to go to the services that the city is providing because they're afraid that they'll ask for their status. And so I'm getting text messages and calls from families about how can we get groceries? And one of the things that the school has been doing is providing groceries, but it's not enough. It's something. And so one of the things that we need to do is empower our communities economically. And one of the things that I'm doing is I want to teach them. I'm not just teaching history and social studies. I'm also teaching a mindset of how to think about yourself, within, like, who are you? Who are they within this sort of pyramid, the social system that we have, and they understand this when I put this up, what this means, and where we are and where others are in this pyramid, whether that's through economics or racial lines. And so a lot of the teaching that educators, and I don't know if there are any other educators in the room, it needs to be about also a mindset, like what kind of mindset are we going to have? And partnering with the private sector to make sure that those resources are also are given to us. So I have felt during this time, it's been emotionally and mentally exhausting, because I have felt this critical responsibility as an educator. I mean, in history, we have seen educators who are at the forefront of injustice on all fronts, and that's because we are molding these minds. And so I want to make sure that I teach them not just what is in the textbooks, but I want to teach them real life lessons and real tangible things that are going to probably save their lives later. Thinking about like Black Wall Street, thinking about the microfinancing that happened in the Chicano movement. What are the things that we can do here with us to help ourselves, and how can we glean from other sectors to help us, to help our students, to help our families. So I think a lot about it in that regard is how to teach our students to be, how to survive, honestly. So that's where I am, and it's been very it's been emotionally draining, but at that I still keep, it still pushes me, because I know that there's so much talent, so much untapped talent within these kids, and so just so much that they have to offer for our economy as well, and for all sectors. So that's where I am. I don't know if I really answered that question.
No, totally fine. I mean, there's definitely an opportunity to continue unpacking this, right? But I appreciate you just sharing where you are at, like as a teacher, on a personal level, but what it means in terms of institutional teaching and really focusing on what does history mean. Like, I remember when I was in grade school, history was very limited. And we know because of recent events, the recent death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many more that we don't always even get to know their names. I mean, the country feels like it's shifting. I know we talked about cautiously being optimistic, as Yani said, and Jenna saying optimism, but, so many things that many people have always advocated for. So again, it's not new, but what's so different about this moment that's really forcing people to sort of rethink and change the curriculum, for example, changing the history, allowing people to recognize, like, oh no, there's amazingness that also comes from Black and brown communities, right? There's obviously a lot of inequities and injustice, but that's not all who Black and brown communities are made up of. And I think it's really important to be an educator and someone of Latino descent to be able to be in that space, because once upon a time you were in their shoes as well. So thanks for sharing that. Alisha, what about you?
So on the personal side, I share what Jenna was saying about raising children, and I actually feel kind of optimistic about at least looking at where my kids are, and my youngest is actually the most kind of an activist, and access to social media, and has really allowed more, I think, kind of education from voices outside of your own community. And I'm sitting here in Needham, which is a predominantly white suburb outside of Boston, and I think to myself, I made the choice to move here. At the time, I was, in a certain state of, okay, where's like a good school, and where are there other families I can connect with? And, that's went through my head at the time. But I think about that a lot. I'm like, I'm contributing to this problem by saying, I'm going to move to Needham, and put my tax dollars, towards this community, and give my kids a certain type of education to other students that's very limited, in, favor of what I have been kind of brainwashed to think going through the system, that, this is what good education is, based on completely outdated, irrelevant standards and ideas of what it means to be an educated person today. And so I think a lot about that decision. I feel like, oh, I'm here, and I'm like, my kids are in it. I mean, I have an 18-year-old, like the idea of, okay, now we're going to move to another community that feels like a barrier that isn't insurmountable. I could do it. It's just, am I going to do it? And, but so personally, I confront a lot of, the decisions that I've made over the course of my life, and what I could have done differently. And, I was a public defender in the Philadelphia, criminal justice system. And I saw firsthand how messed up that criminal justice system is, and how frustrating it is. And I left because I felt like I was a cog in a very unfair machine, that gave, credibility to a whole segment of, the system that has no business having more credibility than anybody else involved. And it was incredibly frustrating, to see it unfold and feel like you were never going to win. You were just going to be battling this. So where I am personally is stuck in this place of, how do we make change within this system versus having to get rid of the system, like all of it, and start over. And I don't know what that looks like, but that's where I struggle with, what are the pathways forward to make change, still living within this system? And is that really going to work when it was created and designed to lead to these situations in the first place? So how is that possible? And that's really what I'm seeking to understand now. I'm like, where do I go to learn? How is that possible? A, and how do you do it? And to come to the understanding of, is it possible or not? And if it's not possible, then what do we do? So anyone who has resources to direct me to, I would love to learn about, figure out a way to answer that question, and then put my attention towards what's going to make the most sense going forward. But on a professional side, and I'm at Impact Hub Boston, and we are, rooted in this idea of supporting social impact work. Like, that's core to the mission. That's core to the mission of all impact hubs globally. But what does that look like? How does that show up? How are we, participating in the system ourselves? How are we, furthering the system? How are we not? And there's a lot in there. And the intersection between me as a personal individual and me as the company, and kind of what role I can play. And we, went through a period of wanting to look for a director. We still don't have one. And it was very important to everyone on the team that we hire a person of color. Like, I'm like, that, has to be number one priority. Because I feel like if it's not number one priority, then it gets immediately shifted down to like 5. And it's bound to just be ignored. If you don't make it number one, then I don't even know if number 2 is even a valuable place to be when it comes to that. So, it's a long process, and we still don't have one because, that's a priority. It's like, I'd rather not have someone than not feel like we're, doing what we should be doing, in this realm. So, and then on the other side, we're this unique company because we're our own company, but then we support, as our membership base, about 100 and so other companies. And so, what is our role as a almost like a container of holding other companies as we talk about this issue. And so we've had it's interesting, right before COVID, we had a conversation as a team about priorities and focus areas in terms of social impact work. And we had decided, this was, I don't know, February or something, that we wanted to focus specifically on racial and economic justice in Boston. And how do we provide support to organizations and people doing that work? And then COVID happened and we shut down. And now we're like, okay, if we want to get back to that, we have this physical space. Is that valuable to people? I mean, I feel like it kind of used to be. Right now, I don't know how valuable that is anymore. Like, I would love to, do partnerships and offer kind of free space and this and that to organizations doing this sort of work. But I'm just not sure the value of that, right now. So there's a lot of conversations that we need to keep having with people, and what is our role? How can we be a support? How do we fit into this ecosystem in a way that's, supportive and not, competing in any way? How do we complement and, find out what do people need, and are we in a position to offer that and be helpful and really listen to folks and hear what the need is? I mean, on a membership level, we've had we had a workshop with other member organizations who chose to come to talk about what has been your response as a company to, the Black Lives Matter movement going on right now. Like, have you put out a formal statement? And Fatima knows, she was there as part of the conversation. And so we had this led by one of our members who, Brenda, who runs and owns Invisible Paradigms, which is a organization focusing on supporting and informing white allies how to participate in anti-oppression. And she does incredible work, and her work is certainly needed all the time. High demand right now, I would say. But so she's running, the first of a couple sessions with member organizations who want to engage in these conversations and kind of help each other work through this together. What is our response? How do we approach this as an organization? Can we hold each other accountable to making certain changes? So that's one of the programming things we're, inviting our members to participate in. And then just, trying to figure out to keep the conversations going and connect with, members we have and other folks we've partnered with in the past about what are the needs, what are the needs, and we're here. And if we have something that's valuable, we're happy to support in a way that's helpful. So that's how we're approaching it, is trying to have conversations and listen to people. And I don't know, that's a lot. I was rambling there for 10 minutes.
And I appreciate your response and hearing all of it. Obviously, it's not perfect, but I know that some people can appreciate the fact that we're not probably going to leave here with perfect answers, but there's just understanding what that process looks like for us right now as we reimagine workplaces and make sure that we're supporting our employees. Yani, I know you didn't get to share, so I want to hear from you. Alisha, thanks for putting in the chat box about if people have questions, feel free to go to the Q&A session, because within the next 5 to 7 minutes, I'll stop asking questions and start answering your questions. So I also want to remind our panelists in terms of time so we can make sure we get all of the questions from our attendees. So Yani, hit us with it. How are you responding? I see the question about separating the two. We don't want to necessarily separate the two. I think based on what everyone is sharing, it seems like they come together. And so Yani, on a both professional and personal level, what does it look like to respond to the recent events that's happening?
Thanks, Fatima, for pointing that out, because for me, it really isn't separate. I have a background in community organizing, and that is one of the main reasons I joined philanthropy, was because there aren't a lot of folks in philanthropy who have an understanding of how social change even functions. And so to me, like, responding in this moment includes finding ways to support the young people that are really driving the actions and the demands here in Boston. I'm also part of a group called TRACK, the Trauma Resource and Response Care for Movements. And we offer emotional, mental, and spiritual support to community organizers and first responders. And then at like a hyper personal level, right? My background, my family's from the Dominican Republic, and the way in which anti-Blackness and colonialism has impacted how even we as a people interact with our own reality of what it means to be a part of the Black diaspora is really complex. And so my sister and I are actively, my family's most of them are in New York right now, including my younger sister who's 19, and she has taken on a really clear role in the family around how do we look at the internalized anti-Blackness in our systems, and also pushing, like, she took my mom to an action where my mom wrote, like, it like had a shirt that said Black Lives Matter, and she identified as Black in a really public way. So there's, like, in the personal context, there's a lot of support that I'm doing right now. And then as an organization, you know, we were founded during the anti-war movement. We have been consistently on the forefront of making sure that we support the organizations that are led by those most impacted by the oppression, the systems of oppression and injustice. And more often than not, those are Black and brown people. You know, like, we were the first official philanthropic organization to fund the Black Panther Party. We were one of the first official philanthropic organizations to fund ACT UP. And in this moment, our grantees are the ones that are holding down the protest. They're developing the frameworks being used nationally around defunding the police. They're the ones offering healing supports to all the folks that are coming out. So, like, we're really clear that our role is to back our people. It's to amplify their voices and to push in the public consciousness that the work of justice is equally as essential as the first responders that we've been highlighting up, the nurses, the folks who are meeting all of our immediate needs, because justice is just as much of an immediate need as our healthcare systems, as our access to food. So that's a brief answer to how we're responding.
Well, brief. Yes, indeed. I appreciate you just being honest. And I'm going to keep you on because I think it makes sense to continue asking personal questions to each of our panelists so we can hop over to the questions from our audience. So many people might not know much about Resist in terms of the structure. Yani works for an organization where it's pretty much a flat organization or flat hierarchy, whichever term you prefer, where basically their team, everyone is a co-director. So feel free to check out their website. But the belief is that, you know, they believe that those most directly impacted by systems of oppression have the vision, the tools, the expertise, and the heart to co-create a just and liberated world. It feels like a lot of us are now moving into that space. And it's so interesting to have you here and even hearing the examples that you've given to us that, you know, what's happened at Resist. So it seems like y'all got it, right? You have the framework, but obviously you mentioned earlier that it's not perfect and you're still figuring things out. So can you give us some insight into how the work you do can help us reimagine equity in the workplace, and also what policies and practices might be changing or, you know, for you right now, or you're sort of rethinking?
So, I mean, like, I'll be really concrete. So we're a staff of 4 people. 3 of us are people of color, 2 of us are Black, 3 have kids between the ages of 6 months, and I think the eldest is like 10. I have an autoimmune disease. Like, there's just so much happening in our system. And the benefit of being a flat structure alongside our worker self-directed nonprofit structure is that we as a staff have to figure out, like, what is the best decision-making process that allows us to be flexible, to shift and change to whatever the needs that emerge. So, like, a really specific example is that right before this call, I was on our weekly staff meeting. And one of our staff members who has 2 kids, he was like, so real talk, this is a really hard schedule to do the traditional 9 to 5. In the summers, we usually do summer Fridays, meaning that we take Fridays off, but he's one of the staff members who works 4 days a week anyway. So we looked at our entire meeting structure and our organizational priorities for the rest of the year, and we're like, what's realistic? What's our priority? Like, what is it that we actually want to have done by October? That was like the specific date that we picked, that we could do while minimizing our meeting time and adjusting everybody's schedule to what they need. So to be able to have that conversation in a structure where everyone has a say that is valued and important, and is like right sized to our life experiences, is really powerful, you know? And I think when I started at Resist, that was true. like that structure was true. But I don't think, and we've been in this structure, I'd say, for the last like 3 years, but it has not been tested in the way that it's being tested right now. And so, of course, we will likely mess up and not figure out like who's being supported in the ways that need to be supported, but to have a system in place where we're able to have the honest conversations, where we have monthly individual and organizational feedback loops, where we're checking in on our values and the ways that things work and saying what needs to be shifted this month, enables us to figure out what in the world we're doing as a system.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I think that's such a helpful tip for people who might be thinking like, what do I need to be doing right now? I was on another webinar where someone mentioned like making sure you're taking note of what's happening, right? And don't lose sight of that, because it's so easy for things to start changing again. And you feel like, oh, we have hands on it, and you don't remember, okay, well, before this happened, we weren't doing this. And so we need to make sure we're doing this now. And then doing it month by month, right? So what we're doing, does it align with our values? Does it align short term, long term? I think those are so important. And I appreciate you sharing that, Yani. I think that's a great way to segue into your part, Jenna, because I know we've been talking about short term and long term goals that your company has. But you mentioned, inclusion always being part of design at where you work. So what are some things that are probably constrained, which you sort of alluded to earlier around remote work, but specifically around inclusion, what are some short-term and long-term goals your company has to address what's happening?
Yeah. Well, for incorporating inclusion into design, generally speaking, I guess being based in San Francisco, our city inclusion has, generally speaking, been a part of our city's DNA and culture for a long time. So like from a physical space perspective, gender neutral restrooms have become a norm in workplaces across San Francisco. Mother's rooms are actually a city requirement for office spaces over a certain square footage. And we advocate for them in our smaller projects too. And, I think in terms of just like ultimate impact, like I was mentioning earlier, our studio really thinks that our biggest impact we have is through our clients and asking our clients' leadership teams on the onset, like what they are doing from a business perspective for inclusion and diversity, and what are they doing on the business front, the organization front, and the culture front. Because we want to know how the design can support that in the physical space. Because I think, we see our role as workplace designers to make those business intentions like actionable in the physical space. So like as an example, and I was talking to Alisha about this a little bit earlier, one of our clients was ThoughtWorks, who has a mission statement, to amplify positive social change and advocate for an equitable tech future, which is super important. And so for our design process, how we worked with them, it started first with picking the right office location. We passed over options that the broker shared in more affluent neighborhoods, and ended up picking a place on Mission Street, which was like a literal and symbolic intersection of new tech and urban grit and tons of multicultural energy. So way different than some of the other locations, making it more approachable and available. We also made it possible for them to give over 1/3 of their physical office space for flexible communal space, both for internal, but also for meetups. And they use that space to help bridge the tech and the local communities. So like literally inviting the local communities into tech offices, which we need more of, like that actual cross-pollination in San Francisco, especially. But yeah, and then so talking with Alisha, so shout out to Impact Hub. We worked with Impact Hub Oakland actually at the time when we built out the space and designed an infrastructure around the public communal spaces where we could rotate artwork. And so Impact Hub Oakland, their partnership with Omi Gallery, an art gallery in Oakland, we then were able to rotate artwork with themes of social justice. So now that gallery based in Oakland can boast like ThoughtWorks tech office is actually like a gallery space. So there's lots of different ways we can include it. in the design. But I think in terms of like coming across limitations of how people show up and physically share space, and actually Fatima, you were mentioning this earlier, like the interesting thing about an office is that it does create an equity of space. You know, today's workplace designs are largely around offering variety, from informal lounges to phone booths and standing desks. But you know, when designed well, these working conditions can provide all workers with an equal opportunity to choose the form of work environment that's right for them when they're in the physical office. And not everyone can have a good office setup in their bedroom or their living room. And you know, people's personal circumstances may prevent them from having equal access to the same tools and spaces that help them be productive. So in this sense, like the physical office can help level the playing field a bit too.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I don't know who I was speaking with, but I was saying, as much as we're trying to be safe as it relates to COVID, and we're realizing that many of us are moving in different phases depending on what state we're in, also noticing that a lot of people can't work remotely, right? They don't have the physical space to do so. And so what's out there in the community, such as the Impact Hub or the other companies that you mentioned, Jenna, that you've worked with, to say, okay, let's make sure that, first of all, it's affordable, that people can afford it, but then also how can community members make use of this space? Where exactly is a physical space? Is it in an area that's accessible by metro or the T or wherever you live? I know we all have different names to call the train or bus, right? But being intentional about that, I appreciate that, Jenna, like being intentional about who you're partnering with and bringing that inclusive and equity lens, because so often it's easy to say, oh, this company is already doing great work, so let's put the company here or let's put the building here. But it's bigger than that. And I think you've alluded to so much of that today. So thank you. All right, Heber, you know, we've talked about physical space, and I know right now the education system is trying to figure out, are students coming back? If they come back, will they have the option to not virtually? What about the teachers? What about the families who can't work, you know, take care of their children? I know Jenna and Alisha, both of you talked about being parents, and I don't know what that looks like. I only know what it looks like. It's a lot of work, right? But also teachers, are they supported? What does that look like? Even people who might have certain ailments or might be immunocompromised, as Yani mentioned. How are we making sure we're addressing all these things? So Heber, I know that's a lot I just said, but in maybe a minute or two, can you talk a bit about how your school is thinking about supporting you, families, and students, and how resources will be distributed, especially as it relates to virtual learning?
Yeah. One of the things that I had already mentioned is the access to technology. And so that's something that district-wide, you know, there's a push to get more technology. Is it enough? No. Are we pushing the council for more? Yes. There's that, you know, on an individual school basis, each school is pretty much using the general guidance that the district has provided to come up with a reopening plan. And it looks very specific to the school because, you know, each space is very different. Each school is different, access, you know, entries, exits, all that. The general guidance that we've had is that for one, which I'm very thankful for, is that families will have the option of whether they want to actually have students come into school or if they want to continue distance learning. It's not totally clear yet if teachers will have that option. I think that they are pushing towards that. And I think that's important, you know, because as Yani mentioned, I'm also a person with an autoimmune disease. And so if we're thinking about we know that young people generally don't show symptoms or don't get as ill, but they can be carriers and take it back home or infect teachers or other staff members in the school. So another thing that they've told us is, you know, when it opens up, and we don't know when yet, in that phase, no more than 10 students can be in a class, no more than 10 people, including the teacher, can be in a single classroom. So there's just a lot of measures that we're taking in terms of also like how students will eat lunch. So they will eat lunch in their classrooms. There will be no large gatherings. Dismissal will be staggered. Not just that, but student attendance to the school will also be on like a day, B day kind of schedule, so that not everyone is in the building at the same time. Now, this all sounds nice and dandy written, right? But we're dealing with primary students, and we're dealing with teenagers, and everyone's supposed to wear a mask as well. So, you know, even the way, I don't know if you've seen in the grocery stores, if people who go to the grocery stores, they have like specific ways where you can walk, and they have like those marks on the floor to tell you where to stand. Like those are all things that we have to implement in the school as well. So those are the general guide, you know, that's the general guidance that they've provided us, but we have to go in and do the really nitty gritty. But one thing that I think that is of utmost importance, you know, we can put down all the policies, write it down and communicate it, but it's also about creating a culture. It's also about creating a culture about mutual respect, about why we're doing this. You know, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So if we cultivate that culture and that mindset as to why following these things are important, then I think that will make it a lot easier for these things to actually, these measures to be successful. And you know, I'm thinking about German culture. Germans are very like structured, and they need like A, B, C, D, and they follow it too. Like if you're in Germany, you won't really see jaywalkers out there because they just, you know. So I'm just like thinking about like what are the things that we can glean from, so that we can implement those things and have a new, or at least develop a new culture of the post-COVID era in our buildings. And that's not just, you know, in schools, it's also, you know, for all other workplaces, and developing that culture of mutual respect, and wearing your face mask, you know, all these things, because there are vulnerable people out there. You know, yes, I'm a young person, and so a lot of the data shows that someone like me or Yani won't necessarily have the worst symptoms of it, but we're severely compromised. And I also have elderly parents. A lot of our families also live with elderly individuals. So, so those are the things that we've been doing. I know that if I have the choice not to go in, I will continue working virtually, because I don't have an option. And it's scary to think about those industries where people may not have a choice. So thinking about those things and how to be equitable in that regard. How do we make sure that these talented individuals in their industries don't lose their jobs? And how do we make sure that equity is distributed? Does that make sense? Or that there's equity within that realm as well.
Sure. Thanks for sharing that. And as people might see, a lot of this, we're still figuring it out and seeing what's working. But I think what stuck out to me is just realizing that there are options, right? And at least that, you know, if people can, or if they choose to, and they have the ability to also work remotely or go to school remotely, that hopefully some of our schools and institutions are also supporting them financially, right? Everyone might not have a laptop, for example, and what that looks like, that's probably something that a lot of schools are thinking about. I know budgets are being, you know, cut, added on to. Some schools or some districts are doing a better job than others, but it's definitely something that we need to consider, because a school is a workplace for teachers, right? And principals, you know, and they have to work there. And then students are coming in and out and might impact their families at home, and their families also might be going to work. And so as we saw how the virus spread, we also know that if we continue to interact with each other within the workplace or outside, we know that it can also impact us in so many various ways. So thanks, Heber. Alisha, I'm going to ask you to close us out, because I want to make sure we answer Q&A from our audience. And if there's more time, we can keep this conversation going. But in about a minute or two, if possible, alluding to this, but I want you to talk more about some of the challenges you're facing and how you're thinking of innovative solutions to keep your members both engaged in and at the hub. I know that Heber was mentioning, like, people have choices, and I know that's probably something similar to you, but, you know, feel free to mention what support looks like for your members right now.
Thanks, Fatima. I'll try to be brief. So I'd say what we're trying to balance is the two big words that stick out in my mind are safety and flexibility. Where it's trying to support our members who want to come in or have to come in with as safe an environment as possible. And also just trying to be flexible. So flexibility can show up in, one of the challenges, some of the people who are coming in don't necessarily want to wear a mask all day while they're working. And in the co-work space, it's a shared space. The rule is you have to wear a mask. And some people don't necessarily want to do that. So what has happened is there's a creation of a space on another floor that is a mask optional co-work space. So hearing from some folks who are saying, I can't be there all day. I'll still be socially distanced, but I just can't keep the mask on all day. So creating an option that's separate space for folks on a whole nother floor that's kind of an enclosed space if they want to work without a mask, but still enforcing the mask requirement on our actual workspace. So we have that. In terms of other solutions, different membership levels. So we used to have just one membership level that was kind of 24/7 access. And that's not necessarily what people want right now. People, I think, want, a certain, we're probably going to be implementing another level of membership that we never really have before, focused on maybe 2 days a week. If you want to know, I'm going in for 2 days a week. I know what my days are. I can kind of plan for that. The price point is more accessible because it's only the 2 days a week. So kind of meeting people where they are in that sense too. And then also thinking about a virtual membership. If you want to just be a part of our online communities, you can do that too. And one way we're trying to be flexible is for some of our full-time members who are not comfortable coming in yet. We have a pause option where people can put their membership on hold for 6 months and there's no cost to them. And so we continue receiving mail. They can continue using our space as their kind of business address for broader purposes. They still have their kind of physical items there. They still get our newsletter, have access to our community, but don't pay anything. And then even after that 6 months, creating this virtual membership option, with potential to add on for our members who were full-time, the ability to add on mail service for another 6 months after that for an additional, smaller charge, because it actually ends up being a lot of work to do the mail. And so trying to be flexible in that sense, like mail is super important for some folks. We have a lot of attorneys, we have immigration, for like mail is really important. It's important for all, lots of companies, but so trying to think of how can we be flexible in what we're offering that can still support members, and just having different options. And, we're still trying to come up with even more, trying to listen to from our members, what are you feeling? What are your concerns? And then what can we do about kind of responding to that? Is there, something we can do with our policies or create a whole new thing, whatever it is, we want to have like a conversation to see what can we do to support you in where you are, and keep you engaged in the hub in some way. Because, we love our members and always want to, keep as many members as possible. It's what makes the community so great. So that's where we are in terms of how we're trying to be flexible while also keeping a high level of safety.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I think hearing you say that right after Yani and Educator just mentioned that, we're folks that just can't mingle any type of way because there are things, there's genuine concerns that we have for our individual selves, but also the people around us and the people that we love. And Jenna, your point about physical spaces and what that means to provide those spaces, and combining both you and Alisha's response around, well, if we are going to provide physical space, what are some things that we need to consider? I think the biggest thing that we've all learned from this recent event, and as things continue to unfold, is flexibility, as you just said, Alisha, but also making sure that we center people that have been marginalized, right? Because it's not like that's just who they are, they're marginalized. We have a systemic system that have marginalized them. And if we recognize that we don't censor them, and whenever we don't censor them, we all fall, right? And those of us who've been falling longer get impacted the most. But if we're not censoring folks, we realize when things like COVID or any disaster, whether it's a virus or a physical natural disaster impacts us, we have a lot of rethinking to do and reimagining of not just our workplace, but our society. So with that said, I want to go over and switch over to our Q&A just to make sure we answer that. I know we're a little bit over time, so I appreciate folks who are still holding strong and might still want to network afterwards. But we sort of talked about this a bit, but I think folks still want to hear from you all. And if you all can't see, just feel free to scoot over to the Q&A section, click on it, and you'll be able to see the questions. So the first question is, the bifurcation is interesting, the splitting of how we are in our personal lives and how we are in the workplace. Can anyone speak on the importance of bringing those parts of us into alignment? So once again, everyone does not have to answer this question, but if maybe one or two of you want to answer this, go for it. I love how we're all like waiting. Okay, go ahead, Ever. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, this is interesting because I had a conversation with a friend recently about, she asked me, do you bring your whole self to work? Or is there a different work person? Like, is there a different work personality? I thought that was a very interesting question. And I think this is sort of what we're getting. So splitting I had actually never heard that word before. So I'm also trying to figure out like the meaning of that word, but thank you for the definition. The splitting of how we in our personal lives and how we are in our workplace. So that question is, I think generally we tend to, act differently in the workspace, more professionally. So that whole bringing your whole self to work maybe is out of the question here. But I honestly think that one of the things that's important is actually getting up, and one of the things that I tried is like getting up and doing your routine that you would have done. And although it is differentiated because there are certain things that you don't necessarily do, I think it puts you in the mindset of being at work. So what I found towards the beginning is, if I don't have any virtual meetings, if I'm just doing some work, if I don't have any classes, I'm in my shorts and I'm in, and that's fine, but sometimes if we get into a mindset, if you actually get up, if you actually get yourself ready, I don't know if this is sort of the question that is being asked. I think that can help because it also helps my mental health because I can then separate what's work and what's home. And I recently moved. I lived in a studio, so it was a lot harder because my bed was here and my desk was right there. And so I didn't know how to differentiate what it felt like I was working 24/7 because at any point I could have just gotten up to my computer and wrote a note or did something. And so it was starting to become really exhausting and I didn't know how to separate that. So one of the things that I had to do being in the studio is I had to sort of create a routine for myself. I don't know if that helps, but
it's so interesting because I did not interpret it that way. But as you kept going, I automatically started thinking about how people now more than ever can't even separate the two because you're forced now to see the way I'm living. If I have kids, what's in my house, understanding some of the social factors that might be impacting us. Because when I first heard the question, I was thinking the first part you mentioned, like, can you bring your whole self to work? Or even when we were talking about, well, personally, this is how I'm dealing with Black Lives Matter issue or police brutality or COVID-19. And here's how we're dealing with it in an institution. But is there a way that you can be dealing with both of them? Like, are we allowed to deal with our emotions in the workplace, for example, and not separate it from the other one?
Okay.
But I appreciate your response because that made me think another as well. So I love how we're responding. Would anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to it too. I mean, following on what Heber was saying, because I kind of like Fatima, like you were saying, there's sort of maybe two ways to answer the question. But I've found because we have a 16-month-old. Both my husband and I work full time, and we all live in one house, and he's not going to daycare. So something that helped us was creating a schedule, kind of like what Heber was saying, like actually creating structure and sticking to it so that you don't kind of devolve into this ever blend. And there's always going to be some of that, especially if you're juggling a lot of responsibilities on top of each other that your old systems of taking care of them, whether it's daycare or something else, aren't happening. But but I feel like structure, defining a structure, and giving yourself the grace to like adjust that structure over time. If it stops working, that's okay. Like assess and redo. Like we've done that quite a few times. And you know, in terms of the answer about like bringing your whole self to work, I think there's like a little bit of like reflection there about, you know, because there's personal and there's work, and there's always been that, you know, generally there's some sort of divide there, right, between a professional life and a personal life. But I think when we assess like the whatever business we're in, our role in that business, the culture, and like the support we have there, and like, you know, I think that this is an opportunity for us. Like we have seen so many of our colleagues' home life, and you know, I've opened up to colleagues in ways that I didn't before, and it's been really healthy. But I think there has to be like a self kind of assessment of, you know, like doing it, maybe making sure that it feels safe for you to do that too. Because so it's finding the safe spaces, and if that's in your own workplace, either with your whole workplace or certain colleagues, or finding other communities. And the one thing I'll say, I have total Zoom fatigue. I'm over these Zoom meetings. I'm having so many of them, and my schedule's back to back with them. But it also allows us to connect. Like I'm connecting here with people largely from the East Coast, and I've been connecting so much with my friends and colleagues not in San Francisco. So I think there's an opportunity to seek out like support and engagement in the virtual community, like elsewhere too, outside of the workplace.
Thanks for that. And I know we could keep going with this question, but you know, what I generally also say is that it's also a privilege to be able to bring those two together. Not everyone has the privilege to bring their whole selves to work. There's like, think a survey that goes out, and we find that a lot of people of color, Black, brown folks, don't feel like they can bring their whole selves to work because their whole selves is not something that's normalized, right? And so can they speak the way they speak at home? Probably not. But can other people, more specifically their white colleagues, speak the way they usually speak at home? Usually they can, because we have a normalization of what's okay and what's not. And I think that leads us to our next question around how are you unlearning, dismantling whiteness in your workplaces, right? So if anyone doesn't know about this, there's like a list of white supremacy culture. Tema Okun wrote it, and talks about different examples such as perfectionism, sense of urgency, etc. Where has it gone well, and where has it gone wrong? So some folks who've actually done the work around dismantling whiteness, what would you say to that?
I can start. And I think in particular, why I'm really interested in this question is because there's often assumptions that like how white supremacy shows up in the workplace is predominantly run and pushed by white people, but white supremacy is the water that we swim in. And so oftentimes, like both I have experienced and have like enacted white supremacy culture in work contexts, like on a semi-regular basis, because I don't realize, like I'm thinking like, oh, I'm trying to move the work along, and in fact, like where's the urgency come from, or is coming from, or where's the notion of perfectionism and making sure that all of my public facing work looks correct, like where does that come from? So I think around like where it's gone well, I think I've worked in particular, and this is just my own bias. I find that like working with youth of color, often like they'll call you out on your stuff when you're doing something wrong, and will also uplift you and when you're moving along the right path. So a lot of my background is in youth organizing, and in those spaces, I've really seen the ways in which folks are often called in and have really honest conversations and honest movements towards change in white supremacy in the workplace. And similarly, where it's gone wrong has been in those spaces where my leadership shows up in a way, and like I feel like I am pushed in a way where I need to lead, and leadership is defined in a way that like white supremacy culture encourages. Yeah, so I think there's like a piece around how does one decipher where white supremacy culture is in their own self, and then using that lens, then reflect it onto your organizations.
So much for that. I know we're basically at time now, so I wanted to know if anybody had like a quick 20-30 second response to this question, which is probably impossible, but just checking in. Yeah.
One of the things
Go ahead.
doing, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Wait. Okay, wait.
I just,
No, you go.
I have been calling out, things within among my colleagues, and I have received fire because of it. But if you know what you're talking about, and you can identify that, like you have to be persistent. You have to, and it sucks sometimes when that fire like gets lit under your ass. I'm gonna say it, but honestly, like it, and I called something out that I really racist. Man hadn't, I don't think he realized it, and he tried to fight me with it, but then I just fought back. And by fighting, I mean educating.
Much for that. And I think you all bring up a point of like it's individual, it's interpersonal, it's institutional. Yani said we're all in the water, right? So we're, even though we have insight and we're sharing what we think, it's work. It takes time. Alisha, Ever, Jenna, Yani, I want to thank you all for coming today and sharing your insight and your wisdom. I hope that this was helpful for our audience. We are at 2:00 or what's that? 11? Yeah. Okay, great. I'm like Jenna, 11 on the other side of our country. So we hope to continue having these conversations. This will be recorded, so we'll share this with you. If you have a few moments and you still want to chat, we will leave the tables and lounge area open. Other than that, we will send you the contact info for all these folks. Their LinkedIn is hyperlinked in the Eventbrite page. So if you want to connect with them or ask them any questions, I'm sure they're more than happy to do so. Other than that, do you all have any final words?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you so much.
Of course. Of course.
You're fantastic.
Thank you all. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we can continue coming and sharing ideas. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.